Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you won't see the show on your TV, so we talk about things musically. Cause you're listening to Jams and Tea, you're listening to Jams and Tea.
Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams, spill the tea. And today we're going to do that with two new records. We are going to be talking about two brand new releases. We are going to be talking about psychedelic pop rock band Spirit of the Beehive and their new record, Entertainment Death, because, you know, I mean, sure, why not?
It's becoming a bit, Jake, at this point, that you intro the podcast and you just have no recollection of the names of things that we're talking about.
Well, it's because I had it in my head and then I forgot it because it was one of those weird-ass titles where I was just like, wait a minute, which one was that one? But the other band we are going to be talking about, which is a fucking, I don't even know how to classify this fucking
noise
band.
rock.
Noise rock band, The Armed's new album, Ultrapop. We are going to be talking about that.
I kind of took to thinking of it as noisecore.
Sure.
Yeah. It's like,
because there's enough hardcore influence in there to qualify
enough core.
that. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those are the two new releases we're going to be talking about this week. And please tune in for our record club this week. Saoirse, it's your record we are going to be talking about.
Broadcast, Tender Buttons, Indie-tronica goodness.
But let's kick things off with what we've been listening to for the last 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
Oh, man. Y'all, I've had a week. I had a little bit of a break in the middle of this week where I had to write a novella. So I did nothing but blast music, lots of new music even. First, though, I'm going to talk about something that I listened to today about 4 hours ago. I listened to an album from a little band. Don't know if you've heard of them, Steely Dan. They have an album called Asia, and I listened to that. Apropos of pretty much nothing. I think I was listening to podcast. Oh,
you gotta get it.
Get
you
it
gotta
out.
do it.
Oh.
The Steely Dan. Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner.
Cool. Yeah, so I remember I was listening to our podcast episode about Steven Wilson's Hand Cannot Erase, and Tyler in it notably brought up the fact that he thought the two most well-produced rock albums of all time were Hand Cannot Erase and Asia in that very episode. And I was just like, you know what? Asia is 40 minutes long. I have 4 hours left in this shift. Why not? And I threw it on, and it's really good. I really, really like that album. I like it more than Countdown to Ecstasy, which was the other Steely Dan album that I've heard. It's like the reason I think it's, you know, Tyler, you mentioned sort of when you started listening to them that they have this sort of reputation as being these like people who have like they're like perfectionists, and then they've got all this like this image that the people have of them that's largely as a result of the fact that they won that Grammy for that album, and people are kind of, you know, about them. But the best way I can sell this album is that it's just like, hey, do you like jazz? And if the answer is yes, congratulations, you're probably going to have a really, really good time with this album. It sounds fucking fantastic. It's raucously fun. It's good. I like it a lot.
I'll just add to that and say that, just to clarify, the thing about the Steely Dan reputation is I think a lot of it comes from a misconceived perception that because the music of Steely Dan is like really musically intricate and they have like weird chord changes and really like melodies that don't go where you expect them to go. And a lot of people talk about them in terms of, you know, music construction and stuff. And so it kind of creates this perception that it's purely intellectual music and that there's no passion in it. And I think both of those things are just completely erroneous. Yes, you can like take an intellectual lens to the music if you want to, but you don't have to do that to enjoy it. And also, anyone who says the music of Steely Dan has no passion in it is just simply not listening to the music.
It's simply not the case on Asia. It's one of those albums. I didn't quite have the same reaction just because I was pretty much with it the whole way through. But I think Zach the other day put on Gaucho in the car and was like talking about that album and was just like by track 3, he was just like, damn, this kind of goes. But like, that's kind of how it is for the Asia. It's like one of those really highly rated records that I've seen on like tons of lists. And it's like really got these like high aggregate scores. And it's really easy to see why, because it's like, I'm glad that I listened to something like Countdown to Ecstasy beforehand, just so I had like a frame of reference, but it's also just a very accessible record. I think that's an album that you could enjoy despite your attachment or lack thereof to the band. Yeah. So, you know, if you're like, there are worse places to start, I suppose, but I would say Countdown to Ecstasy is probably the better one to start with, just because it's you know, a little bit more indicative. You can sort of appreciate the progression that they have, which is pretty fucking notable. And I love that album. It's great. And that's not the last Tyler Core album we will be talking about today. I have 2 albums I'm going to save for the last 2 segments here because they were the highlight of my week. Gonna pull a Tyler here and say that I gave 2 first time listen 10 out of 10 albums, 2 albums that managed to worm their way into my top 100 this week. I've heard them both a few times since I've listened to them, but I'm going to save those for last. I listened to the first album by New Zealand death metal band Ulcerate, who came out with a fantastic fucking album last year, which I re-listened to. It's Stare to Death and Be Still, which I gave a higher score to. I think that would land in my top 10 of that particular year right now, just because it's a fantastic death metal record. And I wanted to, like, if you look at their catalog on things like Sputnik or Rate Your Music, all of their albums are as well regarded as each other, which is like insane. So I started off with the album that is lowest rated on both, and that's their first album, which is called Of Fracture and Failure. And it's phenomenal. It's so good. It's obviously not as good as Stare to Death and Be Still, but I mean, like, again, it's their first album. You got to see where they're coming from. But like, if you told me this was a mid-career album from an accomplished death metal band, I would completely believe you. It's utterly fantastic. It's incredibly technical. It's super dense. It's super atmospheric. The only thing it's got going against it is the fact that it does all of the same things Stare to Death and Be Still does, just not quite as impressively. I think a lot of the changes, progressions, diversions are just a little bit more satisfying on the most recent. But that said, it is absolutely worth exploring. I am very, very excited to continue my journey with that band because they're fantastic, and I have no reason to think that they'll be anything other than that. To switch over to some Morgancore. Third, I will talk about, I listened to my first Death Cab for Cutie album, which if you find yourself asking, Jake, why exactly did it take you this long to listen to a Death Cab for Cutie album? My answer is that I don't fucking know, because Morgan's been telling me how good Transatlanticism was since I fucking met him. I'm bad, I guess. I listened to like the Postal Service 3 years ago and had no idea that Ben Gibbard even was that dude, but that's my only experience with them. But I listened to Plans, and Plans is a spick-fucking-tacular album. Just so good.
I just be crying a lot.
You really do. I listened to it at the end of a long work day, and let me tell you, that shit be hitting when you are tired. It's just a very good, forlorn, like, I guess it's genre-wise specifically, what would you nail it as? Because I'm not really confident in.
I would just say indie.
Yeah, it's indie. It's indie rock. It has some emo inflections, but not really in the way that, and not really in the sound of it, but just more in the kind of the feel of it. It is a very like relentlessly sad record. I think my general recommendation for them is to start with Transatlanticism. Unless like that kind of sad thing is really your thing, because Transatlanticism is a more varied album, I think. But Plans,
it's also very sad.
It has its fair share of that shit. But Plans is, it's a record that kind of, it's easy to understate how good it is because it was so influential and it inspired such a legion of inferior bands and like, you know, and stuff that came after it that was just like aping it so directly that it kind of has become retroactively actively tinged in a certain way. But then you kind of sit down and actually put it on and it's just really good from start to finish.
Yeah, I could sort of listen to it without, you know, the context of all that and just appreciate it for what it is. And what it is great. I think the like, I really like Ben Gibbard as a vocal presence. I think he's good. He takes a little bit getting used to, but that sort of really sort of soft, airy vocal delivery really, really works in his favor with the instrumentation, which is surprisingly dense. I didn't really expect that. It's like, it doesn't really give you the impression that it's like a big sound, and it's not. It's just really like intimate and prescient, and I really, really like that about it. But I also just think that like it's the writing that's genuinely quite stellar. I think that every song on that album is fantastic. I will come back to that, and I am eager to get to albums like Transatlanticism just because it's like, damn, if this isn't even the best this band gets, holy shit, right?
Yeah.
I will run through a few things that I want to shout out before I get to the two things that are really, really big. One, I'm beginning to get into the metal band Mastodon just because I've listened to a couple of their albums over the years, and I've always meant to because I've always enjoyed what I've heard. So I went sort of like back to this near-ish at the beginning of their career and listened to Leviathan, which is a fascinating album because it's a retelling of Moby Dick. It's a concept album. And it rips. It's great. Everyone listen to it. The first song on it is just, it is a complete fucking rager, and the album just doesn't stop from there. It's great. I re-listened.
It's Blood and Thunder that opens that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's like one of the most iconic metal tracks of the 2000s.
The sort of like chorus vocal shouts on the refrain where it's just like, I are fucking like, I'm just sitting there like, yeah, it's so good.
That's must listen if you're into 2000s prog metal.
Yeah, it's just very accessible, very good fundamentals. But I will not bury the lead any longer. The two albums that have just fucking dug their way into my brain. I will start off with one because I listened to two albums from this particular band, and that is Gorguts. Tyler has been talking about this band for a little while now. Talked about the album Obscura. He's going through them in order, and that's sort of the one that's really stuck with him so far.
Well, and to be fair, I actually gave two of them 10s. I also gave a 10 to Erosion of Sanity as well. But Obscura is just this thing that's so...
Your favorite.
It's also just like so fucking... It dominates the conversation about the band because it's so fucking unique and just like a monolith. And
I did take a listen to that, and it's pretty fucking great. It's just in the way that it sounds, it reminds me of very heavy, very abrasive industrial music at points, just in, not even in sound, more just in approach, just because the album is like, it's being beaten savagely for an hour. It's like, you know, it's, you get pretty much what you think you're going to get. And it's, you know, somewhat unexpected, but that's sort of what I knew the name of the game was. But it is not the Gorguts album that I want to talk about and prominently feature here, because I listened to their final record, their 2013 swan song, Colored Sands, which is literally one of the best metal albums I have ever heard. It is relentlessly vicious. It is overwhelmingly punishing. It is unfathomably good. Each time I listen to it, I'm just like, maybe this won't hit like it did initially because I didn't expect it to be like this. And then I go back to it and it's just, I can't even describe it. It's this kaleidoscopic fucking thing. The last time I listened to a metal album that gave me this feeling was probably when I rediscovered Death and listened to Symbolic for the first time again. And I just sort of, all of the metal knowledge that I'd accumulated over the years just sort of fell into place when I listened to that. And the exact same thing happened here. It is one of the most heavy albums I've ever heard. And as a matter of fact, I'd say it's the second heaviest behind Devin Townsend, Strapping Young Lad's Alien, which high praise from me. And it's a pretty stiff competition too. But it is just vicious. It benefits a little bit from having production that's a little bit more contemporary than the albums that came before it. But that said, I still think they make good use of it on albums like Obscura, but here it's just so fucking, it's crisp, and there's just this very prescient attitude of futility and war. Like thematically, it gets to a lot of interesting stuff. It has a lot to do with, like, thematically, I think it kind of parallels sort of the Middle Eastern conflict. I think they were sort of interested in that, and sort of relaying the idea of this sort of desert conflict being this source of overwhelming anguish and agony. And yeah, like it's seen as one of their better records. And, you know, if you go into it first, like I did, you might have your opinion of the band, I won't say like lessened or anything, just because it's obviously something they build to, but, you know, maybe start out with something else just so you can properly build to that, just because I think it is worth it. But it had no less of an impact on me at all. I recommend that to everyone. I would be genuinely quite astonished if anybody on this podcast gave it below a 9. I'd be shocked, frankly.
Oh, high praise. Seriously.
Yeah.
I love the way that, and I genuinely love this, I'm not backhanding, but I love the way that you've kind of like usurped my hype for this band entirely, and just like, it's all on you now. That's awesome. That's the kind of thing that I love when that sort of thing happens. And I haven't even heard this record, so I can't even really add to it.
I want to join in with your praise, just being like, you know, sometimes we can sort of like shout out bands, and you know, depending on how they are, I'll just be like, it's a band, but like, you know, if more than one people get on it, that'll increase. Like, I think this is something that people will really fucking dig. I think everybody will probably get a kick out of everything else in their catalog, from what I've heard. I also listened to a little bit of Considered Dead, which is great also.
I was just going to say that when we do our 1991 metal retrospective video, we'll talk about Considered Dead and have to listen to it, because that's a 1991 metal record very influenced by Death, and also another 1991 death metal band we'll be talking about, Morbid Angel, as well. But that's a good album. So I mean, from what I've heard, I really don't think you can really go wrong. Another thing I want to say is that Colored Sands is actually not the last Gorguts record. They put out a record in 2016 called Pleiades Dust, which is classed as an EP on most sites, but they consider it a record. It is it's one of the highest rated EPs of all time on Radio Music. It is one.
Why is it an EP?
It's 133-minute song.
Oh shit! Yeah, I'm looking at it on streaming now.
So yeah, it's been categorized as an EP in some places, but
that doesn't shock me, because that's sort of how I take in their records anyway, as just sort of one sustained movement anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll have to get on that.
Anyway, yeah, definitely. I obviously haven't heard it, but I see from what people have said, it seems to be great. And also want to mention as well that I did read an interview with Luke LeMay from last year that said that he was planning on starting to work on a new Gorguts record. So it's likely that that'll
be a big day.
Yeah.
He said he was kind of working on musical ideas that may or may not end up manifesting as Gorguts, but it's certainly, the door is definitely open. So we'll see what happens. But I'm fucking so stoked that you've gotten into this band, because they have just had such a profound effect on me. Just for the stuff I've heard from them. So I am fucking fizzing to get to this album now.
No, like absolutely. I think that is their like. It's just a great record, and I can't imagine any narrative under which anyone would think it's anything short of a top tier metal album. And speaking of top tier metal albums, I've been meaning to do this also for forever, because I'm such a fan of an album I've mentioned many times on this podcast, that being Abigail Williams' A Walk Beyond the Dark, which is the best black metal album ever. And I was just like, I'm tired of not having listened to their other records, because I just need to go back and listen to them. I don't get why I haven't. So I went back and listened to 2 of them. I listened to one of their higher rated ones, which is The Accuser, which is a good album. It's production is a little bit muddy and more muted and not really playing to the strengths of the band that I particularly care for, but clearly some other people disagree. It's a good album, but I wouldn't use it to get into them. But the album that really caught me off guard is their first record of all things, which is In the Shadow of a Thousand Suns. And good God damn, this blew me away, especially because it was the first album from them. So I wanted to temper my expectations. It's not a particularly like critically well-received darling, even though it got good ratings. And, you know, it's just when you listen to something like A Walk Beyond the Dark, it's late into their career, and you're like, yo, they were building to this. So clearly a lot of their albums before this, maybe they are sort of, that they're not as fully realized. And that's wrong. It's just wrong, because In the Shadow of a Thousand Suns is basically as good as A Walk Beyond the Dark. I mean, only narrowly prefer that album, to be honest. I would describe it best. It's a very different kind of sound, though. Walk Beyond the Dark is sort of this really textural, very brutal, more traditional black metal that's fused with some strange psychedelia and orchestration, but it's not quite fully into the melodic death metal. This, however, is. It's very much into the melodic death metal camp. And the best way I can describe it is that it is death/black metal by way of Castlevania. It sounds absolutely immaculate. There are moments along, like, listening to this album was like when I first listened to like Sound of Perseverance, and just every single idea and moment I was just like absolutely brain meltingly awesome. And like just the way that they incorporate different elements of instrumentation, strings, the way they use different types of guitar tones, just everything. It's so varied and so expansive and beautiful. Like, oh my God. It's a relentlessly heavy album, but it's a great place to start with them. Like it's just a great way to begin that journey with that band that I will hopefully finish here soon. But yeah, that and Colored Sands have dominated my week. I love them so much. They are perfect albums in my eyes. Check them out.
Okay, swiftly along then. August, what have you been listening to this week?
All right, so on the theme of metal records with a heavy Middle Eastern theme, I listened to System of a Down's Mesmerize. This is half of their final double album to date, Mesmerize and Hypnotize, and it's still System of a Down. I love System of a Down, as has been established, if you've missed that somehow. And yeah, I mean, what can I say? If you like System of a Down, you'll like this. It's like the same shit. Songwriting is maybe a little more direct than what the band is usually known for, but I don't see that particularly as a negative. I quite like it a lot. Next thing, continuing on the metal record stuff, 2 drone metal albums. Let's first talk about Earth 2 special low frequency version, one of the most influential drone albums ever. It's like 75 minutes of getting your face pounded in, and it makes my ears bleed, and I like it a lot. And the album that influenced that album is Lysol, by another one of my favorite metal bands, Melvins. This record keeps up with their consistent irreverence and love for just the strangest of covers. Like there's an Alice Cooper cover on here that's like, it's like 2 minutes long, and they just play the song as fast as possible in a way where it seems like they're trying to get through it, but in like a funny, cheeky way. And it's this Lysol, really irreverent, humorous record. If you like Melvins more for their drony metal sound, this is definitely a great place to go. I like it a lot. It's great. next thing, continuing with favorite bands of all time that I've been catching up on, I guess. The Mothers of Invention, the final album before their final album in their original lineup. Weasels Ripped My Flesh, which was paired with their album Burnt Weenie Sandwich. My hot take here is I prefer Weasels Ripped My Flesh to Burnt Weenie Sandwich, because this is a lot of great live recordings on this studio album. It's like a mix of overdubbed live recordings and studio recordings, similar to his later 70s album Chic Your Booty, but obviously not as ambitious. And this record, of course, has the wonderful My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama, which is a hilarious, awesome song. And it's the
Guitars kill fascists, your mama.
And it burns dads. Let's make that clear. That's in the song too, that it wants to burn your dad. Oh, my guitar. Nice. And also,
looking at these song titles, I'm looking at these song titles. I just want to read some of these. Prelude to the Afternoon of a Sexually Aroused Gas Mask.
That one's great.
That's so cool. Dwarf Nebula, Processional March, and Dwarf Nebula. And my personal favorite one, Eric Dolphy, Memorial Barbecue.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of. Yeah. Speaking of Eric Dolphy, he's a heavy influence on this album. Like, there's a bunch of songs that name Out to Lunch by Name. It's a really cute, cheeky thing. And also, this record is My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama is a direct precursor to Frank Zappa's albums Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe. So if you love those albums, you have no reason not to at least listen to My Guitar Wants to Kill Your Mama.
After the guitar kills your mama, is it eaten by cymbals? This is my question.
Literally fucking shut up. How does your brain think of this stuff?
I feel like I just witnessed Tyler unfurl months of tension.
No, because I could tell Saoirse was really waiting to get this one out, and so there was anticipation happening in my mind, and it was just the most fucking.
Oh, we have fun here.
Yeah.
August, what else have you been listening to?
I'll wrap this up with another definite highlight of my week. Kind of continuing this month, for those who've caught on, I've been going through a lot of more classic punk albums. And I listened to Television's Marquee Moon.
Good album.
Fantastic album. An album that would not exist without the Velvet Underground, and that if this did not exist, the Strokes would not exist, because
so many bands wouldn't exist.
So many bands for that matter, yeah. Strokes are just the one that immediately jumped out to me as wow, there's melodies they've lifted or done something very similar to on this record.
This is obviously not a hot take, but Marquee Moon has got some of the best guitar work on any album.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The solos, incredible. The one that really gets me is I love the outro to Guiding Light.
Oh, fuck, it's so good.
It's just some of the best production on a guitar I've heard. Every song on here is just real. Most of the songs are just really tight, really sprawling, unique for a punk band.
While we're dishing out hyperbole as well, I think you could make a pretty strong case that the title track on that record, all 10 minutes of it, is maybe the best, maybe the peak of all rock music.
It's real good. I wouldn't deny it. I wouldn't deny it the title of being either the best or one of the best, because it is one of the best. But yeah, brilliant stuff this week. That's what I've been listening to. Morgan, how about you?
Had a slow ass week. Just mind was on other shit. But I will say, I did listen to one album in particular for the first time this week. I happen to be sharing a podcast with the creator, one of at this particular moment. Listened to Glacier Flower 2020.
I did also.
Yeah, it's Kino. It's lit. It's good ass album. Just really solid ambient / dark ambient stuff. I enjoyed it a lot. Very textured, tickled my brain spaces in ways that I enjoyed. Yeah.
Oh,
But
very
otherwise,
good.
I don't really have anything else to report.
I also had a slow, not as slow. So everything I'm going to mention is like everything I listen to. I'm going to start off with "Sleep Well Beast" by The National.
Oh,
yay!
Which
I didn't know you listened to that.
I did. It's currently sitting pretty at a 9 out of 10 on my Rate Your Music page. I think
Accurate.
out of the 3 National records I've heard, my favorite's probably still Alligator, I want to say. But boy, is it tight. And that's probably just because like Alligator is slightly more of like a pulse, and I vibe with that aspect of it. And it has the song "All of the Wine" and "Daughters of the Soho Riots," but this has the opening track and the closing track. So,
And
You
when that
quoted "All the Wine" so many times, I can't think of that song without thinking of you.
I
really glad to hear that.
am pleased that you even if indirectly shouted out the opener and closer on that album, because to me one of the strengths of that record. Sorry, Morgan.
I was just going to express how much I love Nobody Else Will Be There.
Yeah, and I was going to express how much I love the title track, which no one ever talks about, which is this gorgeous pool of fucking amazingness. That album is just like the perfect. That album is the perfect 3 a.m. drive album. Like if you're just driving and that's the one to put on. That's the one to listen to in the middle of the night. That record is the sound of.
August, will you shut the fuck
What the
up?
fuck
And
is
when
that?
that particular beast sleeps, is there a number associated with it by Iron Maiden?
Wow.
Yeah.
August
Wait,
just
you
became
finished?
me.
Yeah, I
for a
was going to
minute.
say. Well, it's fine.
Done here.
That was I can't even remember when this happened, but there was a moment where Tyler mentioned like a song in like a really early episode of the podcast, and then August was just like, I know you were gonna say that. It's just so loud. That was exactly the same.
Yeah, I can remember that exact moment, and I likewise can't remember what the context for it was. It's gonna bug me now. Anyway,
Yeah, like the 3-track run of Guilty Party through the Dark Side of the Gym is just like
yes, fucking.
I'm crying. I'm
Yeah.
crying in the club.
That is. I need to pull over because I have too many tears in my eyes and I can't see.
Yeah.
Tony Soprano
just
in the car.
The way that as the crew of the National go on, they work more and more and more with like texture with their instruments. Love it.
That's the Dessner brothers for you.
Absolutely. Right. I've been trying hard to like listen to more records I wouldn't expect myself to listen to. And this next one is one of them. It is Astroworld by one Mr. Travis Scott.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
What do you think of that?
Which I enjoyed.
It's a good album.
Yeah, I don't tend to like gravitate to the sound of the genre in which he works, but there is several.
Sarah's just not big into trap. Fucking
What?
Color me
Well,
surprised.
You made the right choice though, because Travis Scott is comfortably like the trap artist of the 2010s. Like he's the one. Like Rodeo specifically comes to mind, obviously, as the big masterpiece record of his. I think you'd really, if you enjoyed Astroworld, I'm almost positive you'll like Rodeo more than it.
Yeah. I find amongst the opinion amongst people I respect seems to be that this is a mixed bag. It has highlights and lowlights, and I tend to agree with that. Like there's songs I really hate, but also the Weekend feature's really great. And yeah, so it kind of goes between that for me. But this is someone working in a genre I don't like a lot, doing good work, and that's something I can really respect.
Props for just doing that. Props for jumping into that world, because that's the sort of shit we should all be doing.
I mean, it's the
Thank
most
you.
popular thing in music for like the past 5 years. So, you know, gotta stay on the wavelength somehow.
And
It's
I'm
great.
going to finish off with something I knew I did this week that isn't listening to an album, but involves the process of listening to an album. And this is an excuse to plug something I'm creating. So I watched the movie of The Wall this week.
Yay!
Which is, I stand by this, one of the best pieces of art, full stop, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I including that movie in a series of sort of conversational, personal essays about not analyzing movies, but explaining my personal relationship to movies that I'm going to be dropping links to over the next week.
Baller.
Yo.
Everybody go watch I should do that as a record club in the future, where we did like the Exile on Main Street and Exile in Guyville thing. Is that I need to do a record club with Pink Floyd's The Wall and the movie, and then we can talk about that, because that'd be a great episode.
And the song
Tyler can have a chance to explain his mystifying 7 out of 10 for that record.
I like the album. I really like the movie.
I thought you had it in an 8, and I had to make peace with that. And now that I know that it's lower,
it's a very it's not that it really matters, but it's a very strong 7. Like it's close to an 8. But,
I mean, I feel like while I'm watching the movie, The Wall is my favorite Pink Floyd record. When I'm
as
not,
it should be.
When I'm not, it's probably Wish You Were Here. But,
what the thing about me in the fall. Yeah, Marquee Smith's Wish You Were Here. No, the thing about
Wish You Were Here.
The thing about me and The Wall is I think that it's a very good album, but I think that I feel like I'm stealing a bit here, because this is something that Dan Olsen said in his video on the Nostalgia Critics essay on The Wall.
I watched that too.
But he said this, and then I was like, yes, this actually kind of gets at why I feel the way I do about these two things. And that's that The Wall is a very great album, or a very good album. Great, good. Boundaries are, it's a very important record, and it deserves all the love it gets. But it feels so much more complete when it has that visual accompaniment that the film gives it. It feels like when you listen to the record, it's kind of like one side of this entire multimedia experience. And that's a really facile criticism to have. It's certainly not the only reason why I don't have it rated higher, but I do think that the fullest experience of The Wall is watching the film.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
I'm sorry, I have to. While I was here, Tyler, you have Wish You Were Here at a 9.
Yes.
What's missing? What's lacking? What did you want that's not there?
Another part shown on Your Crazy Diamonds.
I don't love Welcome to the Machine.
Oh, fuck off. No.
It's a good song. Quit
the podcast.
It's a good song.
First off, Jake, you will not. Contract has you here for another 50 episodes at minimum.
Hams and Tea podcast.
It's like the contract you signed in Phantom of the Paradise, where you
I was not expecting that kind of visceral reaction. No, it's a great album.
Welcome to the Machine fucking rules.
It's a great song. I don't think it's as great as some of the other stuff on that record. My issues with that record is more that I don't know that I like the way that it comes to... Oh, you're going to hate me. I don't really want to get into my feelings on Wish You Were Here. It's a great album.
Because it's on the Record Club docket. So
I should not have to justify why I've given an album a fucking 9 out of 10. It's a great
you shouldn't,
album.
And yet you must.
It's a great album. Shine On You Crazy Diamond parts 1 through 10 are all fucking 100 out of 100 music. Title track is great. Have a Sakara is very good as well. And so is Welcome to the Machine, but that's it. It's a 9. It's a 9.
It's on the Record Club docket. We'll get to it.
Now I want to fucking.
Tyler, what have you been listening to this week?
I just want it known. We talked about this exact thing earlier today when Tyler was just like, I would much rather have somebody to just tell me to fuck off than passive aggressively aggrandize me.
And I appreciate the candor of both of you. I just wasn't expecting it.
I had to at least let you explain yourself.
I feel I haven't done that well either.
It's the thing is that when you hear not all of that album works for me, you expect to hear that followed up by I don't think Have a Cigar is as good as the rest of the album, which is still a bad take. Don't get me wrong, but it's a bad take that I'm far more prepared to hear.
Morgan just left at that.
Morgan died.
I think Walk in the Machine and Have a Cigar are both 8 out of 10 tracks. And everything else on the record is a 10. And so it ends up at about a 9 if you want to think of it numerically.
Now that we've lined you up for the fucking egg throwing.
Yeah.
Morgan's catching a plane to New Zealand.
I'd give it an 81 out of 100, closer to a 90.
Shit.
Closer to an 82 than an 80.
August would give this fucking album a 7.5 or an 8 probably, and you wouldn't say shit. So
I don't know if I wouldn't say shit.
Anyway, good album. Great album, in fact. Some might say near perfect.
I'm waiting for Tyler's door to open behind him and Morgan just emerges and fucking snaps.
This is gonna be like the bit of the Terminator, like Morgan.
What the fuck is this here?
Like, this is Tyler Atkinson. Yes. This is Tyler Atkinson. Yes.
Okay. Fucking so much for blitzing through this episode. Look, I'll keep this quick. I don't actually have much to report. Mostly re-listens, in fact. The first album I want to talk about is I really had a great time listening to. I listened to it back to back with the record that preceded it. I listened to Jeff Rosenstock's Ska Dream, which is a ska version through and through of one of the first albums we reviewed on this podcast, which was his 2020 album, No Dream. And it fucking rips. What's great about it is that it's not just a transposition of the songs into ska. It is superficially that, but it's like all these different waves of ska, all these different sub-styles of ska. And it's not just like Jeff Rosenstock's like, oh, I like ska music, I'm going to make my album in the form of ska. This is his bread and butter. Like his early stuff with Bomb the Music Industry was heavily influenced from ska and incorporated a lot of ska. He is a ska man through and through. I just really like saying the word ska. But this album is so much fun. It's raucously entertaining. If you enjoyed No Dream, you will enjoy Ska Dream. It is not in any way a backstep from the quality of that record. It's just obviously a slightly different atmosphere, considering that record the original had some quite emotionally heavy moments, and they are perhaps tempered back to because ska doesn't necessarily lend itself to that kind of emotional gravitas.
Has anybody ever done anything like this before? Just like rework one of their albums to be like a different genre? Like this feels kind of weirdly unprecedented.
I feel like this has been done before. Well, actually, yes, it's not really the same sort of thing. But the first thing that comes to mind is what Run the Jewels did with their second Run the Jewels album. LP remixed it with entirely cat sounds as Meow the Jewels.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that now.
So that is the entirety of Run the Jewels 2 made with the instrumentals made up completely of cat sounds. It is not as successful of an experiment as Ska Dream.
I should imagine not.
But with it being completely done by LP, it's better than you would expect it to be. It's something. But I think there have to be probably other examples that come to mind.
Do more of it, artists, because that would be cool.
But yeah, Ska Dream is absolute fun. It's just blistering fun from start to finish. Other first listen of the week, and this is actually part of a wider trend with a particular artist that I'm loath to say I'm getting really fucking into. I was dreading the day this would happen jokingly, but also kind of really dreading the day that I would fall head over heels in love with the Mountain Goats, because I knew it was going to come, and it finally has happened. Most of what I've listened to this week has been re-listens. I re-listened to All Hail West Texas. I re-listened to The Sunset Tree. I re-listened to Get Lonely. I re-listened to the biggest, most effective re-listen this week was their album We Shall All Be Healed, which has become my favorite Mountain Goats record so far. But I also gave a first listen to Heretic Pride, which is also an awesome album. All of these albums are fantastic, and they are fantastic in their own, like, we talk about how moving and emotional the Mountain Goats are. We reviewed Tallahassee. We talked about how, the emotional core that record has. But really, what has to be emphasized is just how versatile of a songwriter John Darnielle is. I'm not going to get into it because this podcast gets enough Mountain Goats references on a week-to-week basis. But I genuinely have to say that John Darnielle is one of the greatest songwriters of the last 30 years. And I think that if you listen to those records and you pay attention to the writing and the way that he writes and things he talks about, and you don't agree, you just have no taste. It's like, and I'm not saying that for you, Saoirse, I'm saying it because I mean it. It's like he's one of the greatest songwriters of his generation, in the same way that Jimi Hendrix is one of the greatest guitarists of his generation. It's just by every metric with which you would judge how good something is, it is. So that, shout out to the fucking Mountain Goats. Fuck. Also, re-listens this week, I want to shout out. I probably talked about this record when I first listened to it months ago, last year, but I re-listened to Herbie Hancock's Sextant I think that was yesterday as well. And that is quickly rocketing from a great Herbie Hancock record to one of my favorite jazz albums of all time. It's even overtaken Headhunters and Empyrean Isles, which were previously my two favorite Hancock records. Sextant is a great jazz fusion record because it sounds completely unlike any other jazz fusion record. It's just a tight 40 minutes. The first 10 minutes is like pure electronic noodling, but like incredibly rhythmic and tribal and awesome. And then it settles into a groove. It's only 3 tracks long. The final track is a sidelong 20-minute jazz piece that features extended kazoo solos. I'm just going to let that sit in the... yes. Yeah, exactly. And so it's an awesome album. I would not be surprised if it ends up in my favorite albums of all time list the next time I update it. I mean, it
sounds dope.
Yeah, you can trace the influence of this record into artists as disparate as fucking the Mars Volta and Kraftwerk were both equally influenced by this record. It is just stunning electronic fusion. Go Herbie. Go Herbie is a Venetian Snares reference that I didn't realize until after I said it. Only I would get. Anyway, I also re-listened to one of my favorite electronic records of all time, but also my favorite noise record of all time, which is Fuck Button's album Tarot Sport. It is, describing it as a noise record is kind of doing it a disservice because it works with noise templates, but it's really like a electronic post-rock shoegaze album more than noise. It is euphoric from start to finish. It's just like these hammering melodies that make you feel like you are bursting on fire and like ascending into the sky. It is an absolutely euphoric album. If you want to feel good, put this album on. It will make you feel like you are... It's like a fucking 50-minute orgasm. I know that's a trite and cheap way of describing any record, but Tarot Sport by Fuck Buttons is that record. It is absolute euphoria for an hour straight, and I cannot sing its praises highly enough. Amazing album. And don't be turned off by the fact that I said noise music as well. It's not harsh noise. There's a very clear distinction between noise music and harsh noise. This is noise music with the structural aesthetics of post-rock and the sound of shoegaze. Amazing album. Anyway, so that's my week. Fucking hell, we really... let's just rollick forward. Our first album today that we're going to be discussing is... so before we kind of get into it, we're kind of discussing two new releases from two bands that are very zeitgeisty at the moment, that are very kind of like getting a lot of attention in online music communities for quite different reasons, although they're both kind of emblematic of similar things.
Absolutely.
And they're interesting in different ways as well. So there's interesting ways in which these two records converge and also wildly differ. But the first one we're going to talk about is this band is fucking fascinating. I've listened to this album a lot. Spoiler alert, I like it quite a bit. But I am almost not more captivated necessarily, because I don't want to take away from how much I like this album, but it has to be said that the story of this band and what they've been up to and their antics are almost the most interesting thing about them. And again, that's not a disservice to the record, which I like a lot. And I think complements their whole atmosphere and attitude and thing as a band, because they this is gonna make some eyes roll, but they feel less like a band and more like an art project. And this album is just like one expression of their vision, and the rest of it is just all the other shit that they do. It is alternatively a really raucous and great and focused and melodic noise rock record, and also just a kind of a complete shitpost. But I expect that it will be at least a little bit divisive, and I'm kind of hoping that it will be a little bit divisive in this discussion, because I feel like it's kind of engineered to be. And to me, that a lot of the things that make it divisive are its greatest strengths. For me, but that's because I'm kind of really on board with it. But before we can even really get into going back and forth on what we think about this album, I've written down a lot of things about The Armed to contextualize it, because you cannot talk about this record in a vacuum. You can enjoy this record in a vacuum, you can listen to it in a vacuum, you can evaluate it in a vacuum, but if we're going to have a discussion about this album, we can't do that without discussing who The Armed are, what their narrative is, and why this album seems to have blown them up. So some context. The Armed are ostensibly a noise rock band based in Detroit. They appear to be the brainchild of a frontman named Dan Green, although God knows if that's his real name. One of the big things that dominates discussion or dominates the narrative of The Armed is the fact that they have played with their image, and specifically the notion of who is even in the band. Their front man and their members have gone by various different aliases over the years. They have engaged in various antics to confuse music journalists. A lot of their commentary has been on, a lot of the stuff that they've done has kind of been also commentary on fans of heavy music and heavy music cultures, but also specifically they've targeted music journalists in a lot of really funny and interesting ways. Most of which are represented by just generally trying to confuse people in terms of who the band is, who's in the band, and what their identity even is. The members of The Armed appear to be people of all ages and genders. Guitarist Chris Lorak of the noise rock band Metz, who we talked about last year, is apparently a full-time member now. Queens of the Stone Age guitarist Troy Van Leeuwen plays lead on one of the tracks on this record. And the band are joined by the frontman of the legendary sort of post-grunge band Screaming Trees, Mark Lanigan, on the closing track of this record. So there is a lot of contributors who are on this record, allegedly. It's very difficult to tell what's true and what isn't true with this band. A lot of the people that they've recruited to feature on their records or to build their narrative, it's unclear if they've actually contributed in the way that they said they have. Everyone seems to be in on the joke, and it's unclear whether it is even a joke at all. As I've said,
Are you gonna tell the story of what they did with Ben Collar of Converge?
Yes, that's definitely in my
Yeah,
notes.
yeah.
Don't worry.
Oh well, this I gotta hear.
So, as I said, they've kept their identities a mystery for many years. But supposedly, Ultrapop is representing the moment where they reveal themselves. They have done press interviews. They've recorded music videos in which they all appear to feature. Supposedly, they appear to be a collective of at least 9 members, including 2 drummers, 4 guitarists, and 6 vocalists. Obviously, several members of the band are double duty, with additional guests. One constant, aside from this Dan Green figure, in this band's narrative is also a very interesting figure, and that is the Converge co-frontman, Kurt Ballou. Who's produced, I think, all of their records, including right from the beginning when they first started out, including this record. And there have been lots of theories that have circulated online that The Armed is actually entirely Kurt Ballou's creative vision and a project that he formed. Something which, and this is where it gets confusing, he has both outright confirmed in an interview, as in, yes, I made The Armed, they are my band, and then outright denied in a subsequent interview and claimed that he was misinterpreted. I've looked at these interviews and I cannot see how the first interview was misinterpreted, unless it was misinterpreted in the process of being written. But
no, he is just posting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's something I'm going to get to as well. Is there a lot of kind of theories of bubble around fan communities? People have tried to understand, like, what is The Armed? Is it really like this art project? Or is it just like a complete shitpost? And I think where I have ended up landing is that it is an elaborate practical joke for the most part. But obviously, I think what makes this interesting is that it is an elaborate practical joke, but I think the music is also really interesting and has a lot to say about it. It's not just it's not just an elaborate practical joke in the sense that it's like a bunch of people going around playing really random shows and pissing people off. They are both an elaborate practical joke and a band that have released several records where they have a consistent sound that develops and that is kind of reaching its pinnacle on this record. Anyway, among some of their other antics, they tricked Rolling Stone into doing a band photo shoot that, unbeknownst to the magazine, just consisted of paid actors. They scheduled interviews with major media publications using actors, and their music video director pretending to be their front man. I've got some other interesting details here as well.
There's Chad energy all around. Right?
As I said, the front man has gone by various different names and identities. They had, again, as I said, they had their music video director, Tony Wolski, pretend he was the lead singer and call himself Adam Valelli, who is apparently another person that is definitely not this person, and had him be joined by a man named Clark Hughes, who is supposedly the band's keyboard player, but is a bodybuilder who spent most of the interview talking about bodybuilding and not the band.
It would be really funny if his name was Clark Hughes and he was like 5'4".
He claims this man Clark Hughes claims to have played keyboards on the band's debut, which features no keyboards whatsoever.
You ever seen Flatliners? Shot by Yonder Pop? It just has that energy.
God, where am I? So yeah, those kinds of antics are the sort of shit that they get up to, and I've got more on this list still to come. They made a music video for a song on their last record that starred Tommy Wiseau. And this will interest certain people on this podcast. They released a non-album single a year or so ago titled featuring Frank Turner, that had a photograph of a different British musician, Frank Carter, on the front cover.
Yeah.
And
I'm aware of Frank
Didn't they just take sound clips?
They took samples of Frank Turner demos and used them without asking Frank Turner, which pissed him off to no end. And then
Payback for Make America Great Again.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Uh.
But then there's also this really weird aspect as well, where they were, for some reason, when they were like really underground years ago, and like 3 people had heard of them, they were name checked in a major Ford ad that aired on CBS during James Corden's Late Show, despite the fact that no one knew who they were. There was this ad with these kids who were talking about their favorite bands, and the Armed came up or something. I don't know. And this is something Morgan was alluding to. Another interesting and hilarious thing they did is they managed to book Converge drummer Ben Kohler to play the drums on their last record. And according to Kohler, he initially refused until the band promised falsely that Robert Trujillo would play bass on the album.
What?
Uh-huh.
And that was the point at which Ben Kohler agreed to be on their last album. Although, again, because Ben Kohler is in Converge and Kurt Ballew's been working with this band since the beginning, who knows if that's even true or just a big joke.
What happened, at least in one account that I read, is that after he refused, excuse me, and he found out that Jesus Christ.
Someone throw holy water on Morgan.
Your mother sucks cocks in hell.
The Armed are trying to silence Morgan.
Yeah. Jesus.
It's the spirit of fucking Dave
Beehive.
Hughes or whatever his name is.
Big man.
But yeah, one of the accounts that I read was like Kohler basically got shanghaied into recording the drums for that album because they told him, Baloo told him it was Converge demos that he asked him to drum over.
Well, that's also a theory that surfaced when Baloo said, "Oh yeah, it's my brainchild." People started wondering if it emerged from Baloo envisioning a side project to Converge, and then it kind of ballooning into the Armed. And because there was an interview he gave in 2009-ish, or around the time that the Armed first came out, where he was talking about how he was before the Armed were a thing, he gave an interview where he was talking about wanting to have his own project that pushes the boundaries of like how the image of heavy music and stuff. And so he had this really like interview where he was interested in all these kind of conceptual things about what it is to be a heavy music band and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of evidence that mounts to this really being Baloo's brainchild, despite the fact that he doesn't appear to be in the band. Except as their producer. This band have also been connected to, and by connected to I mean there have been there's significant evidence which suggests that they have worked with or had incorporated into them Andrew WK, Insane Johnny of the great noise rock band Wolf Eyes, and
fucking what?
And most hilariously, there's mounting evidence that pro skater Tony Hawk is involved in this band. in some way as a creative director or look, I went on a fucking rabbit hole researching this band, and it's like fucking it's wallpaper with it's that
Pepe Sylvia.
It's that meme.
Fidelio.
They say Tony Hawk. There is no Tony in HR.
Yeah. So look.
Not only had these people been in the band, but they've been waiting for their mail. They're shouting about it upstairs.
Yeah. One way that this band was described that stood out to me is they were described as a mix between Converge and Anamanaguchi, which I think is a hilarious description of this band.
And an accurate one.
Yeah, exactly. So look, I've given you all this funny, mostly just because I think it's funny and worth talking about.
Yeah.
But we've given you all this information about what this band are and what they do outside of their music. And certainly they run the risk of having their antics overshadow the music entirely. And I would not be surprised if that is a criticism that gets levied on them by someone today. And it would be justified. I could definitely see the argument being made there. They certainly tread a thin line between sheer creative mania and nauseating saturation. I can see them falling either side for any potential person who is into noise rock or heavy music generally. But I personally am here for it. I find it energizing. I find it relentlessly entertaining. I think the music beautifully mirrors the chaotic spirit of the band as an entity, and I just find it raucously fun. And I have a lot of other extended thoughts on the sound of the record and the style of the music and stuff that we'll get into and we'll talk about in turn. But I don't want to lapse into a thing where I just talk for endlessly. So at this point, I'll take a step back, and I want to hear from you guys about how you, whether you knew any of the stuff that I talked about for starters, how you approach this record, and like how you experience this absolute blast of raw energy.
That's fucking. I had no idea about any of that shit. So, like, and even now that I know it, it's not like a thing where you're just like, oh, now that I know all these things make sense to me, because it's just like, I mean, no, I just thought that they were a band who made music like this, and as a band that makes music like this, I mean, I really enjoy Ultrapop. I think it's an insanely fun album. It's a very... It's not like short, but, you know, it's under 40 minutes, so, you know, it gets to the point right away. I think the opening track is an interesting experience because it's just, like, you could see bits and pieces of the band's sound in there, but, like, I want you to imagine you're me, and I go listen to this album purely because it was Stereo Gum's album of the week. No one I know has talked about it at this point. I just throw this album on, and it's got this cover, and it says Ultrapop on it. So, naturally, I am expecting, like, a Baroque thing. Like, I'm expecting, like, Julia Holter or like, something? And instead, you get the title track, which is not entirely separate from what I expected, and it's just kind of like, as the record sort of goes on, you just sort of get like, oh no, this is like fucking, like, you look at the genre descriptor on Apple Music and it's metal, and you're like, is this just Apple Music being weird, or is this actually metal? And no, it for the most part is actually, in fact, very weird, blisteringly electronically tinged hardcore, and it's quite fun. Ultrapop just sort of lured me into a false sense of security at first.
Genre, we've talked about it being like noise rock and
Post-hardcore,
attached post-hardcore, but like there are points where I almost feel like this is like if like a post-hardcore band wanted to make hyperpop, and
exactly. I was going to make that exact fucking comparison, is that it's just like,
especially there's a track on the back of the album, I think I can't remember which one, but it starts off like really slow compared to the rest of the album. It's not slow, but slower than the rest of the record, and then by the end it's like one of the harsher tracks by Sophie.
There are definitely lots of moments on this record where they, and again, okay, so Jake's touched on something really interesting, which is image and presentation and aesthetic with this record. This record definitely sets out to present itself as a certain thing and then reveal itself to be something very different. And it's classic kind of subversion, right? The cover is like a Spotify playlist type cover. That's how it's designed to make you think this is algorithmic music, especially combined with that title. The photo is just a generic photo of a model. And it's just this generic cover with this really kind of like pleasant color scheme that is designed to be easy on the eyes, and Ultrapop in this kind of like embossed font reminded me in a little bit of in a certain sense of like the way that Black Country New Roads aesthetics are kind of like very sort of similar, but this is kind of more purposeful in the sense that it's there to set a certain expectation and then to subvert it. And I don't think it's just like, oh, we're gonna make you think it's this and then it's actually that for the sake of it. I think there's a real purpose to what they do with this record, and I think it comes down to the title encapsulates it brilliantly. Which incidentally, another fun fact, the title of this record is taken from a random Rate Your Music review of their last album, which described it as Ultrapop. The frontman Dan Green asserts that was pure coincidence, but it just feels too good to actually be coincidence. But anyway, the thing about
like a version of that "Don't Believe His Lies" meme with Kurt Ballou.
The thing about the armed, and I think what they try to do, and I've kind of touched on this a little bit, is they try to upset and muddy and play with the image of heavy music and the image of metal and of the playfulness of that sort of scene, and also crucially how successful it is in how much cred it has in like the mainstream of alternative music. Like historically, a lot of noise rock and eccentric metal music has been the realm of niche, has stayed out, has not particularly been a field of interest of your pitchforks or your hardcore sort of like, or your zeitgeist defining spheres of music journalism. And so as a result of that, metal communities and extreme music communities became or have been these quite insular niche groups of people basically that have developed their own kind of norms and stereotypes and attributes and that sort of thing. And I think what the Arm try to do is playfully poke at that. So this is kind of what they're trying to do with this record, which sounds quite similar to their last record, incidentally. But basically, they're trying to create the expectation that, or the image or the impression that they are going pop, that they are selling out, that they are crossing over, when in fact, they're really kind of just doing the same sort of thing that they've always done, except more finessed than ever. And I think it does certainly have, I think, a stronger melodic core than the other stuff I've heard from them. I would say that it's the best thing I think they've done yet. But they are deliberately provocative in their presentation. They're deliberately provocative in their sound as well. And this is, I guess, where people will either get on or off with it. It's a heavily compressed record. It's a very, it's not compressed in the same way as like the Paranormal album that we talked about, where the compression artifacts were used as a particular texture to evoke a certain emotional feeling. It is purely just like it wants to like brick wall your ears, and a lot of the time the melodies and the riffs and all of the kind of musicality of it is absolutely submerged in this murk of noise that should not work for me as well as it does. And this will be where you either get on or off with the experience of listening to this record, but I find it absolutely exhilarating.
And I feel personally that for me, the compression was certainly where I got off with this album, because I do like a lot of the basic melodic ideas in these songs. I like a lot of the vocal passages. I like a lot of what it's going for on like a base level, but I found the compression to be like a consistent obstacle in my sinking into this record. I never I listened to it like 3-4 times, and I was just never really able to get past that in my experience. It was just always a hindrance I couldn't quite get on board with, frankly.
And it's like the hyperpop thing. Like, that was a genius thing to say, because you're right. It uses compression to exaggerate sounds in the same way that hyperpop and that kind of music does.
Oh yeah.
So it's just applying it to metal, which is interesting.
I'll just leap off of that and say, my feelings are very similar. In many ways, this is maybe the most frustrating album that we've ever had to review, because I fucking love, LOVE, all capitals, love what is under this album, because it's buried under compression. I had to dig up the flax on Soulseek because the streaming version of this was straight up unlistenable. I could not stand it. So I think this album is very good, and I'll even be interested to see if it grows on me more than it has now. But as is, like, it feels like they've done it a disservice by compressing it to such a degree that I can't make out everything that's going on all the time. Because while something like All Futures is really exhilarating and fun in like a way that heavy music almost never is, it's just stuck under walls of compression. And I don't know, I find that singularly frustrating.
So, are you going to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I fall between these two stables. Where like I listen to it and I can hear what like they're going for, and I know that if I am to play it at the volume at which it would consistently brickwall my ears, it would cause lasting damage. So when I play it at a more like tolerable volume, what I get is less like brick walling, and it's more like this lacks tonal depth that I need to be punched in the face by these guitar riffs, I guess. But then there are fleeting moments where it really comes into its own, and it's like there's some like moments of like blast beating on the back end of the record, some really intense riffs. Towards the back end is where it really comes to life. I mean, you get lots of this stuff where it's like, I want the whole record to feel like this, where I feel so alive. And for the rest of it, I can really appreciate it on an intellectual level, I guess, for me, because I think this is a really good and interesting record. But my problem with it is it doesn't hit the bar it sets for itself as much as I wanted to. Because when it does hit that bar, it gives me a feeling like few other records.
Well,
yeah, it can really feel like auditory cuckoldry at points.
Right.
I'm glad that there are these kind of variations in response to this particular aspect of the record, because it means I can comfortably emphasize the fact that I think it's the best part of the whole fucking album. To me, well, not necessarily the best part, but I think it's the sort of defining aspect of it that takes it from above being just a great noise rock album to being like something that truly feels congruent with what this band's antics are all about, what they've been trying to do, and what makes them so unique. And I don't just mean like this band is unique because, they add heaps of compression to their noise rock, but it does feel like they're doing something truly subversive, akin to a lot of what we see in popular zeitgeisty stuff that is exaggerated, that is blown out, that is kind of like almost a parody of itself. And I totally understand where people would get off, as in like get off the bus on that. But I find the pure noise fury, the absolute dense, impenetrable heaviness of the way that this sounds and is produced to be absolutely just dopamine triggering. It enhances so much of the energy of the record for me in a way that is totally counterintuitive. You're right. It shouldn't make it feel, it shouldn't make it hit harder. And yet it really does. And for instance, I think it's definitely worth shouting out the lead single All Futures, which is, in my opinion, probably the best song this band has made yet. It's an absolutely incandescent and blistering slice of noise that is also accompanied with a great music video, ostensibly of the band. The chorus of this track is both immensely catchy and so lathered in compressed noise that it's almost completely indistinguishable. You are fighting through the murk to hear the core pop gem catchiness at the heart of it, and that feels like it's akin to, that feels like it is congruent with this aim of the band to present a particular kind of like, this is us making our pop record, this is us selling out, but at the same time we're completely doing that in the least listenable, or at least like presentable way possible, is a better word than listenable, because it is very listenable. And I don't know, it just feels it adds to the exhilaration of the experience of this record to me, especially when the record gets into its really intense parts. Like, for instance, when All Futures goes right into Masunega Vapors, which keeps the intensity up and arguably pushes it even further. This is a track that even has qualities of hardcore screamo at points, I thought. But it also is tethered by a talent for great melodies that definitely feels of a piece with a lot of their noise rock contemporaries. Except, again, it's like these guys are almost like the Ween of noise rock in certain ways. They do that. They do the template of noise rock really, really well, but they add an idiosyncratic weirdness to it and a dynamic idiosyncrasy. I already used that word twice now, but that makes it feel different. Average Death takes an anthemic chorus and absolutely buries it in a wall of sound. And I find the experience of listening to this, I think, much more interesting and rewarding than just listening to the anthemic chorus on its own. I love the way that the stuttering drum line lays over top of it. And because of the wall of sound and the glitchiness, it sounds like that drum beat is electric and glitching and stuttery. It adds a real texture to it that I love. The climax of this song sounds fucking enormous and euphoric. Real Folk Blues has a discordant guitar line that sounds both detuned and fried. Thank you, Troy Van Leeuwen of Queens of the Stone Age, for that. And then the second last track, Bad Selection, is almost like that song and the title track almost feel like they have a bit of a dream pop influence in their noisiness as well. I do think there is, contrary to maybe the vision of the album that we've established, I do think there is a dynamic range on this record. And yeah, I find it so ridiculously entertaining from front to back, and I love it basically.
I get loving it, even though I don't, I guess, because the thing is, it is such an conceptually interesting record. Even when I'm not totally vibing, I'm like, wow, there is someone in the world who is going to hear this and it's going to speak to them, and that person is Tyler.
Well, I mean, Jake, you haven't spoken up since the start, and you said you quite enjoy this record.
Oh, well, I mean, I was kind of caught off guard initially, and I think that I was initially, like, not to say my opinion soured, it just wasn't as initially positive just because I was a bit too caught up in, I guess I've really taken to talking about not just, like, albums this way, but in terms of both form and function, both what something is and what it does. And I was just so initially captivated by what it did that I couldn't really evaluate it for what it was yet. And then when I finally did that around, I was just sort of like, that's when the compression sort of, like, I sort of had the mentality of I enjoyed this on an initial listen just because I wasn't expecting any of it, and it just sort of came at me in a wash. And then when I re-listened to it and I tried to come at it from the angle of, I want to find all there is to appreciate about this because there's clearly a density here, and the production doesn't quite complement that. Like, I won't say it's compressed enough to the point where I can't make out anything. It's really just the fact that it's compressed in an inconsistent way that is the only problem I really have with it, is that on a track-by-track basis, different parts of it are constricted into the mix, and some of it sounds really claustrophobic and some of it doesn't. And on the parts where it doesn't, I'm like, holy shit, this is so, like, heavy, and all these Converge comparisons are really making themselves known. Like, one of my favorite Converge albums is The Dusk in Us, which has a huge mix that sounds very brittle and very tight in a very similar fashion, but it also has a very distinct mix. This is, like, way more cluttered, and on one hand, I'm like, I kind of enjoy this because the density of it is kind of the point, the overwhelmingness of it, the attitude of it being in the vein of something like hyperpop, ultrapop. That's sort of the message here, is that they're using their music as like a really saturated thing to make ultrapop, and I like that. It's just that I feel like they really haven't struck that right balanced yet, and they're like right on the verge of it, to the point where I enjoy all of the album, but I really like I'm like in between literally everyone, but I sympathize the most with Morgan, because he is like at a distance a bit with it, because I am also at a distance with it, where it's just like I could love it if this one thing was changed, but the production, it doesn't kneecap it, but it creates a ceiling, and that ceiling is fucking frustrating as hell, because on like, just if you tampered with this one itty bitty little thing, I would be like, this is an album of the year contender. I love it. It's great. In principle, it's fantastic. It's just, it's so fun. It's just tantalizingly close. And that's what frustrates about it.
It's so frustrating because it's like just like 2 or 3 degrees over the mark in terms of compression. It's just like a little bit too much. And it kind of permeates a lot of it.
Yeah. All I can say is I do hope that there is the possibility of it growing, especially if it being so on you guys, especially if it is so close to that level. I have to say the compression's just straight up never been a thing that bugged me. I know my ears are definitely wired to be perhaps a little more tolerant of some of that stuff. Aside from the fact that I think that it's conceptually unified with what this whole thing of this band is going for, which is basically just being as in your face and as contradictory as possible, basically. Like this is, I think, a pop record at its core, just massaged into the form of noise rock, and then having this leathered blanket of compression laid over it. And it results in something that I think treads 2 extremes. It treads that visceral, ugly, compressed, almost mathy noise rock at points, and the scintillating, colorful shades of pop music. It's like something you could nod your head to and enjoy the power show. And also, I guess, think a little bit about how meaningless and ephemeral the boundaries between these 2 extremes really are. Other bands before them have done similar things, but I like the way that the Armed approach this kind of dynamism in a more chaotic way. And I also like the thing that really sells it is the fact that they do it with their tongues firmly in their cheek the entire time. Again, it comes back to this whole thing of like, is this even really more than just a shitposty extension of this lengthy, over the top practical joke? And can you enjoy that as a record?
If I may, I have a bit of an extension on that, which interestingly relates to a record I mentioned earlier, that being Earth's album Earth 2, which is obviously this Lo-Fi as Balls drone metal record. But the connection here is that the record was marketed as like a new age ambient album. And what I think is so pertinent there, and what's interesting, is that I think that's a point where I feel that the shit posting of the whole thing doesn't go too far, because that's a case where I feel there's a lot in that album I can really be invested in, and like outside of just that concept. And with the Armed, I feel a lot of my investment in the band more comes from the extra context than the album itself.
Yeah, I definitely figured that would be the case for at least one person,
and
or multiple.
I can actually I have an interesting counter to that, because it sort of, in a way that sort of links into our review of what is currently my least favorite album of the year, being Welfare Jazz by Viagra Boys, and their shit posty cover of John Prine's In Spite of Ourselves. You can shit post all you want if the music is there, you know. If you can portray a musical proficiency and really creative energy instead of just playing a song shittily and calling it a joke, that still pisses me off. which the Armed completely fulfill that criteria of having the songs being there. I don't think there's really any danger for me personally of this sort of crossing over into, is this just a shit post for the sake of it? Because the music plays and comes across like somebody legitimately fulfilling a creative desire and not just going for a punchline. The problem that I have with the album is completely separate from that. And it really is just that it is just that those 2 or 3 degrees too much compression. And it just keeps me at a distance from it.
Just to get away from the compression for a bit and just to kind of start wrapping up, because we've definitely talked about this album long enough, I think. But one record I'm surprised that hasn't come up, especially when we started talking about hybrid pop adjacent and the notion of like exaggerating the conventions of metal to make a particular point or to get at a particular sound that complements a particular ideology or whatever. I'm surprised that the music of Black Dresses hasn't come up in discussing this because I feel like they have similar aims. With the way that they play very kind of heavily distorted and exaggerated styles of like metal music and push conventions into, they essentially perform conventions in subversive ways, whether it is subversive in terms of identity as with what Black Dresses do, or whether it is subversive in terms of the way it reflects conventions purely and the way that music is consumed or how heavy music is analyzed or talked about. So yeah, I think that those are both records I think do interesting things with the conventions of metal and the ways that they exaggerate it. And basically all the production decisions and all the sounds and all the styles of this record work for me because they work as an extension of that exaggerative quality. And yeah, I've basically talked in a circle a bit, but yeah. Good album, good. Like the sound of it.
Hey.
Okay.
It tickles my eardrum in a way that I like.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's just move on then. Favorite tracks and ratings for the Arms Ultrapop. Jake, why don't you let us off?
My 3 favorite tracks are, I'm gonna say, Ultrapop, the title track. I'm gonna say All Futures and Real Folk Blues. Least favorite, it's kind of a tie, just because these 2 songs are right after each other, and it does create a tiny bit of a lonely energy for me, I suppose. And that's Average Death and Faith and Medication. I'm not a really big fan of either of those songs.
No love for Average Death. God damn.
Or Faith and Medication.
And I give it a 7.
Okay.
Fair beans. August.
I don't know. I guess my favorites are No Futures, My Balls, and fucking Chinese Satellite. Least favorite, I don't know. Fuck it. 5 out of 5.5 out of 10.
Got him.
Morgan.
August just went, my favorite tracks are 5.5. My three favorites are title track, All Futures, and Big Shell. I don't really have a least favorite. My rating is 6 out of 10.
Okay, so my 3 favorite tracks are Faith and Medication, Where Man Knows Want, and Real Folk Blues. And if I had to pick at least, I don't know, Masanaga Vapors, I barely remember it. So I'm giving the record a 7.5 out of 10.
My 3 favorite tracks are Masanaga Vapors. No, It's actually not my top three, but I do love that song. My favorite tracks are All Futures and Iteration, which is awesome. I don't think we talked about that song, but that one's awesome. And I'm also going to shout out Bad Selection from near the end of the record, which is really awesome too. And one of the most unique songs on the album, I think. Least favorite song is probably the closing track, actually. I'm not massively fond on. Music Becomes a Skill. And I give this record an 8.5.
Oh, nice.
Wow, that is like the quintessential rating for every member of this podcast, because we had August with the lowest, Morgan with the second lowest, me in the middle, Saoirse with the second highest, and Tyler with the highest, which I'm pretty sure correlates to all of our average ratings.
It does.
There we go.
Average 6.9, nice. Which is corresponding to the artwork by Liturgy, Green to Gold by
Morgan's just like, all I know is pain.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so much better than the artwork. It's not even funny.
I'll take it. I'll take that.
Green to Gold by the Antlers and Gore by Deftones.
Green to Gold is maybe the polar opposite of this album.
Gore, the artwork, and this album, like, there's so much shared DNA with the problems of each of them. Like, I really can't think of more fitting records to be next to each other.
Yeah, the level of compression on Gore is like the level of compression I want on this album. But like it's because it fits Ultrapop and it doesn't fit Gore.
It feels like a mistake on Gore.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas it's obviously an intentional aesthetic decision here.
Fix it.
Okay, well, let's move on to our second new release that we're going to be discussing today. Another very zeitgeisty album, but in different ways. It is... Spirit of the Beehive are a Philadelphia-based neo-psychedelic band. I can only assume they've taken their name from the classic Spanish film by Victor Erice. This is their fourth album, as I said. They first developed buzz with their last record, 2018's Hypnic Jerks. But Entertainment Deaths has followed in its footsteps to provide another slice of gentle, quirky, and weirdly unsettling kind of indie pop.
Hold on. Gentle?
Gentle, quirky. Parts of it are gentle. Like, this is the thing. This record is a land. This record is a land of contrasts. In our record club this week, we talk about Broadcast's Tender Buttons, which is an album that similarly is focused around kind of contrasts between quite harsh and clattering, noisy textures and kind of soothing, more conventional textures of indie music, and examining how the two can interrelate, how one can help accentuate the other or add a different tone to the other. How is noise music affected when you have this kind of neo-psychedelic indie pop integrated into it? How is sound collage-y stuff affected when you're integrating it and anchoring it within hypnagogic pop, which is the actual subgenre title that is often a lot of neo-psychedelic music like this is thrown into. This album, I think, is a confident step forward for the band. I think it's a surprisingly well-unified mixture of simple, heavily reverbed psychedelic songs and what I can only describe as digital detritus, glitches and noise and radio static from the fringes that kind of bleed into the songs, sometimes halt or shift them completely, and other times just kind of hang as a textural backdrop. I'm going to foreground my thoughts, and again, I won't give them all at once because we can go back and forth, but I'm not as in love with this record as I am with the other records that we've talked about today. I think it's slightly less successful in its goals, but I also think that it is original and idiosyncratic in its own ways in a similar manner as well, that I respect and do enjoy to a certain extent. I do think there's a risk with this kind of music or this kind of musical approach with the kind of, hypnagogic pop and the digital detritus, coming across as potentially making up for a lack of interesting songwriting, that you're dressing up underdeveloped songs with noises and textures. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's a critique I hear today, because it's one I've seen levied at this record already. But I think my experience with this record is that perception is something that I think the band, for the most part, are reasonably good at avoiding. I think this is a record that hits the mark not as consistently as it should, but it does have a dreamlike, stumbling quality to it and a really nice sound. I think this is an immaculately produced record that I find quite both relaxing and disquieting and just generally like really stimulating.
I find myself, if I had a lack of frustration with the previous record, that like I was frustrated, but not nearly as much as, say, August or Morgan. I think it was transplanted here, mainly because there's so much done in theory, and I like maybe a little over half of the execution overall. There's at first, honest to God, when I first listened to the album, I didn't like it at all. In fact, my thoughts were quite negative, as a matter of fact. But upon a second spin, it sort of unlocked itself in a way, except it didn't like click with me. I just sort of got it, and that being that it has a very deliberate structure to it. It has a very like, it's just sort of starting messier and more chaotic and just sort of like building and building and building. And it's like a pyramid where each song is like, it's a smaller base foundation and it's getting more focused. And as it goes along, it gets a little bit slower. It gets a little bit more like basically what you would expect for in like, hypnagogic pop. It's just that every step of the way, something about how it executes every single thing it does is just like good, bordering on great. It just never pushes itself that way, and overall its messiness becomes way more of a bug instead of a feature, for me anyway. I think the album gets off to a pretty rocky start with me personally. The first 3 tracks, Entertainment, There's Nothing You Can't Do, and Wrong Circle, are just songs that are in desperate search of an actual identity. I just feel like I'm listening to music trying to find a point in real time, and I find it very frustrating because on a production level, it sounds pretty technically great. The first track gave me a lot of like Plunderphonics vibes, and I was just like, okay, I sort of get what this is, but it just never congeals in a way that feels satisfying until we get to Bad Son, which is a track that I like a lot. I think that sort of slows down. It has a really solid progression that the other ones don't have. And the lack of structure on a lot of these songs, like the album has a specific structure, but the songs on it are just so unruly on occasion, and it makes it really, really frustrating to take in as a whole, especially with an album that's really not all that long. But even then, I get through The Server is Immersed, and it's just like the album seems to find its footing. But then there's I like Death, the end of the album, a little bit more. I think it's like, with the title of the album being Entertainment, Death, it beginning and ending, it's sort of having this bookend. I think that there's sort of that there might be a more thematic thing that it's getting at, where it's like entertainment is this idea where, you've got all of this wider sound, this more chaotic sound, and then you whittle it down, and then you get to death at the end. And death is like this singular, more contained idea. But that leading up to that point, the record just loses me again by complete virtue of the opposite problems that it started with, is that it just feels so restrained. It feels like it's playing it safe after it decided to be way too risky in the first part of it and not hit all of its bullseyes. And it's just like, come on, guys, you're so close. Just because, like, on an individual basis, it's just like parts of these song structures work for me. It's just that when you toss it all together, it feels like a fucking mess. And I get it that it's kind of irreverent. It's kind of just sort of playing by its own rules and going by its own logic. And I can see why someone else would find the appeal in it. However, it really left me personally struggling, and I I ended it being a little bit more frustrated than I would have liked. I think it is it just skirts over the line and trips over to being a good album, but really with me, only just. There are songs like the incredibly, fantastically named I Suck the Devil's Cock, which just, like, I don't know. I feel like there's some songs that exist and they have titles like this and silly lyrics and stuff, and it's just sort of trying to distract you from the fact that it's got an insanely not engaging melody to it that just is just like trying to skirt by on its quirkiness, which this album kind of does a lot in that first half that just grates on me really annoying, but like I tried to give it the benefit of the doubt, and I do think it's good. It's just it's good in spite of itself for me.
Yeah,
No,
I'll sort of pose a counter to that, in that I didn't have Jake's problem at all with this album, because I simply never got on board with this.
I had a feeling that was where that was going.
Yeah.
Can't be disappointed if you don't care to begin with. Yeah, this just fucking completely washed over me. It felt kind of formless and identityless, as Jake said, to such a degree that I couldn't even get through the first song without my attention waning a little bit. And that's one of my probably my favorite track on the album. And you know, I'm sort of, yeah, that might give you the wrong impression that I hate this album or something. I just think it's bad. I don't care enough to hate it. It does nothing for me, which is predictable, probably. But it also just, I don't know. It feels like it meanders and kind of, as Jake said, tries to get by on its quirkiness. And I don't know. It just nothing about it connects for me.
Well,
even in a purely visceral way of like hatred or something. There's no moment on this album that I outright hate or made me angry or anything. It's just flatline the whole time. Chape on the bone.
I think that it's so strange to me that if you were just like, yo, Tyler's gonna come in and just be like, one of the two albums we're going to talk about today, it could be a shitpost, and it ends up being The Armed, which, what? That's the one, not this? Really? Yeah. Okay.
The album with I Sucked the Devil's Cock is not the shit post.
That's the authentic one? Okay.
It's actually Spiderland.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, all right. Well, okay. Well, it's weird because I'm kind of mixed on this album, but I'm definitely more positive than everyone else here. So let me do a bit of a counterpoint then. So the influence of big names in the indie world of like hypnagogic pop, as I said, and modern indie psychedelia is definitely marked on this record. This is a record that would not exist without, for instance, your Ariel Pinks, who is obviously, I think, the biggest influence on the sound of this record, and also to a lesser extent your Alex G's and other kinds of bands in that realm as well. Although what I like about Spirit of the Beehive is that they are a band with weirder and wider ambitions than either. Like Ariel Pink, for instance, great provocateur and really kind of sexually subversive in a lot of really interesting ways in his prime. Less said about how he is now, the better. But yeah, made some great records and made some interesting records and this kind of similar sort of musical vibe as this. But what I like about Spirit of the Beehive is the way in which their music, I guess this is just like me, but there's a real visceral quality to the experience of listening to a lot of this. Not all of it. There are definitely parts of it that feel washed out. And I would definitely agree with Jake that the record doesn't get off to a particularly strong start initially. But the more I listen to this record, the less I become interested in kind of picking apart individual songs, especially in the first half. But the more I've kind of come to appreciate this whole thing as kind of like one continuous piece, with the shifts and levels of change within a single track working as kind of a microcosm for the overall structure of the record from song to song. What stops it from being a total piece of washed out ephemera are two specific things. The first is the fact that musically, there are lots of solid grooves on this record that I would like to stand up for. I enjoy the stumbling, drunken saunter of Give Up Your Life. I love the way the music doubles on top of itself in that song to a climax that's lathered in harsh distortion. I think other tracks on this record build off of strong bass lines and rhythmic centers to lather washes of instrumental texture over top in a way that feels more controlled than random, especially when you have organic strings and electronic bleeps brushing together and interweaving around the soft-spoken and purely textural vocals, as you do on tracks like Rapid and Complete Recovery and There's Nothing You Can't Do. I do think that the band interestingly put the most melodically direct and focused song right next to the most strange and disassembled, with the 1-2 punch of shorter tracks. The server is immersed and it might take some time. The latter in particular approaches pure sound collage at certain points in a way that I could easily see being infuriating, but I personally love. I think the entire highlight of this record is ostensibly the 6-minute I Suck the Devil's Cock, which moves through jaggedly different sections with wild abandon. It starts off as this strutting melodic number before literally exploding and then reforming itself through washes of fragmented sound. It's trippy and thrilling. It's an absolute feast for the ears and good headphones. As I said, I think this is an immaculately produced record. There's a lot of dynamic range in the way that all these different sounds sit together within the mixes of these songs, for the most part, the best songs anyway. But yes, admittedly, there are other points where the band do feel like they play in circles and don't necessarily have the same sort of interesting combinations of sounds as on those highlights. Songs, for instance, like Wake Up in Rotation, Wrong Circle, and for me, the closing track, Death, come to mind in this regard. They feel much more flat and less interesting. But one thing I want to dwell on, or sort of finish my thoughts on, is I think that the success and the popularity of this album, because it has taken off quite a bit in online musical communities and on Twitter, is telling. I think especially when its biggest influence, Ariel Pink, who I've already mentioned, is obviously so blatantly and obviously uncool now. This band have a much more Zoomer-esque vibe anyway, a kind of modern slacker sleepiness, where Ariel Pink would be provocative. But I think what tethers it all together is the fact that this is a really groovy record at its best moments, and the sound collage aspects, which are the most interesting aspects of this record, and the way that they clash and interweave with the other kind of standard indie pop sounds of it, I think elevate it in a way that's interesting. But I am curious though what you all think of the success this has had and the connections that young people have made with this kind of sound of music. Like, what is the appeal, do you think?
I feel like the sound is just sort of super zeitgeisty at the moment, and it appeals to the sort of romantic disconnect that is traditional of youth, but particularly of the younger generation at the moment, of feeling completely like the world you're entering into is completely sort of alien, but you're like cool and better, so you can listen to this spaced out kind of thing in the same way that almost like the more psychedelic stuff that the Beatles made appealed to the younger generation then, I think. But then like, and I think that's just why the sound really appeals. But then I'm like I think that's why something like The Less I Know the Better by Tame Impala was a hit, you know. But then I'm like, there is just I don't know. I don't want to get into my thoughts on it through this angle, but that's why I think the sound's sort of taken off.
Well, I have a bit of my own answer to the question that's less jokey, but I do think a bit of what has been mentioned by Jake and Morgan does really contribute to why this record is so popular, and that's maybe a bit of the personality and irreverence the band attempts. I think that that almost irony, which is something that we see in that I mean irony, air quotes, however you choose to interpret that irreverence perhaps is a better word, that we hear in a lot of hyper pop, but also combining that with a lot of more tuned down sounds like we're getting out of a lot of hip hop currently. I think that combination may be what's particularly appealing. That I can't say for certain, but I think that's an interesting thing that came up in my mind, how it seems to bridge those two niches in a sense.
I think I'd have to agree with that, August. I that's the only thing that I can really latch on to that I could see being like the thing about it.
Yeah, this was gonna really just be me talking to myself because I don't think any of you have listened to this band, or maybe you have, but I don't really know. The other band, the thing this reminded me of, although this is a much more kind of ephemeral and noisy and weird band, but it's kind of like it reminded me of the band Deer Hunter from the 2000s, and not the Deer Hunter. I know that's another band that we all enjoy, but Deer Hunter, the kind of indie rock band and dream pop band, who I genuinely think most of you will love. I'm not making this comparison because they're that similar, but I think they have kind of similar sonic aspects, a similar kind of slackery vibe, and a kind of irreverence, especially the personalities in Deer Hunter. The personality of the Deer Hunter frontman, Bradford Cox, is really a big selling point of what makes that band so fascinating. But it's almost like interesting. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. And the reason I put this album here was not that I thought it was particularly great. I think it's good. But I do think it's interesting, this kind of like slackery, heavily atmospheric, but also kind of weirdly messy sound is kind of coming back into prominence now. It feels like this band could be Gen Z's Deer Hunter, but in the sense that Deer Hunter was a band that encapsulated indie rock for a lot of millennials, and the sound of that particular kind of dreamy indie rock in the 2000s, and Spirit of the Beehive are taking that and they're adapting it and they're changing it and they're performing it in a way that is more in line with how alternative music sounds now for a lot of young people, and the whole atmosphere and personality and vibe of that being much more blissed out but also weird and kind of paranoid as well. I don't know. It's a weird combination of sounds in this record that I think I find really interesting.
Favorite tracks and ratings.
I don't give a shit about.
All right, favorite tracks and ratings. I will go first. I guess my favorite tracks are The Server is Immersed, It Might Take Some Time, and I Suck the Devil's Cock. Least favorite track would be Wake Up in Rotation. Album gets a 7 from me.
So my favorite tracks are Give Up Your Life, The Server is Immersed, and I don't know, Wake Up in Rotation, I guess. Least favorite tracks, A Bad Son, I guess. It's getting a 4.5 from me.
My favorites are, who cares? I don't remember anything off of this album, and I will never listen to it again. I feel like giving 3 favorites on this is almost dishonest, just because I can't remember what they sound like. 4 out of 10.
Favorites, yeah, it's kind of same camp as Morgan here. He has been the one now to steal the bit from me. I shall give it a 4 as well.
Okay, Jake.
My 3 favorite tracks and ratings, I'll say it is Bad Son, Rapid and Complete Recovery, and Give Up Your Life. Least favorite, Your Mother Sucks Cocks in Hell. The album gets a 5.5.
Okie dokie. So that is a flat 5 on average.
Okay, well, let us know in the comments below what you think of the albums we discussed today. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think we missed anything? Please let us know. We're dying to know. So we're gonna go now.
Love the 4th track on Tegan and Sarah.
All right, as always, everyone, rock on for London, rock on Chicago, IBM, solutions for a smart planet.